Okay, so I kind of want to go ahead and get back into our coverage over DC All In. The reason why, because when it comes to my channel, I have been doing this for a while, but I kind of want to make sure I still have that balance where I cover newer things and also old things as well. I do understand, like, hey, I got fans out there who only love the old content, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, and maybe the 2000s, and that's truly it. But at the same time, I still have some folks out there who love the idea of the 2010s and the 2020s as well. So I can't just ignore one group for the other group. Got to find that balance somewhere. And with that being said, it's only me here working on this channel. Now, with all that being said, I kind of want to go ahead and get back into our coverage of DC All In when it comes to Action Comics. Now, at this point, Action Comics was being written by Mark Waid, and he gave us one heck of a long story when it came to DC All In for storyline, for Action Comics. But getting into the opening pages for issue number 1070, we do pick up at the new Fortress of Solitude. Now, when it comes to the new Fortress of Solitude in this storyline, it does take place in between Absolute Power and the Battle of the Watchtower. But either way, we do see the original Phantom Zone projector crack. And with it cracking, it begins to open up. And out of nowhere, this creature just pops out of the actual projector. And of course, this would be a very big problem for our hero, Superman, here in a moment. But we then shift over to Metropolis. And I kind of like the idea of us seeing Jimmy Olsen just going out of his way to kind of like get a good angle for a picture, but get a good picture for the Daily Planet. I almost said the Daily Bugle. Now, with all that being said, it's kind of cool to see Superman and Jimmy hanging out, showing their good bond with one another. But of course, with that creature being released from the Phantom Zone, you have Clark see it automatically and realize he has to get to work. But once you have Clark realize that this creature is really more just a combination of three men who were merged together, who are also Kryptonians who were locked away in the Phantom Zone, you have Clark try his best to stop them. The problem is that they're Kryptonian on planet Earth with the yellow sun affecting them, which means they have the same powers as Superman, but times 3. And so for Clark, he begins to struggle automatically when it comes to fighting against something like this. But luckily for Clark, he does have some backup. And that would be Supergirl. Now, for Supergirl and Superman, they are technically the only two people in the super family who are full-on Kryptonians. The others are kind of like, half Kryptonians or partial Kryptonians or just too young to battle against someone like this. So for Clark, he tells Jimmy, we can't call in the rest of the super family because the rest are just, like I said, half Kryptonians who are not at full strength like Superman or Supergirl, or just not old enough yet to take on a powerful being like this right here. And so it's Clark saying they will die in an instant. So you have Clark and Supergirl try their best to fight against him. The problem is that they can't. Now for Clark, he realized what he has to do. And that'll be the idea of him going after a golden version of Kryptonite. And I kind of like this page right here to give you a quick breakdown of the different versions of Kryptonite. And well, there are many different versions. Now, in this one page, it's only like the green and the red Kryptonite, but we have seen so many different colors. And I love the idea of Mark Waid kind of bringing in those different colors of Kryptonite, like the gold one, where of course, when it comes to the gold one, it has the ability to shut down a Kryptonian's power. So, for example, for Superman or Supergirl, if they stay around the golden Kryptonite, they might lose their power temporarily or possibly lose their powers forever. And so for Superman, he kind of want to go ahead and use this golden Kryptonite on this combination of three men who are right now fighting against both Superman and Supergirl. Now, the problem is that once you do have Clark arrive back into Metropolis, that battle is still going on between Supergirl and the creature, and the bridge does get damaged. Now, you have Supergirl and Superman try their best to keep the bridge afloat. The problem is that they're still trying to fight against the creature. Now, luckily for our heroes, Jimmy Olsen was there. And when it comes to Jimmy, he does use his watch that has the ability to call Superman if he's ever in danger, and kind of use that device to call the creature over. And once you do have the creature get nearby Jimmy, you then have Jimmy being able to use the golden kryptonite to shut down the powers of this creature. So just like that, it's now completely powerless. Now you also have Superman and Supergirl tell us that this Kryptonian creature was basically calling out for somebody to kill it. Like it was saying in Kryptonian, but it wanted to die. But this kind of leads into Superman meeting up with a few other people in the closing parts of the first chapter at the Fortress of Solitude, where you had Superman informing people that he'll be going into the Phantom Zone. And the reason why, because he realized the Phantom Zone has been evolving over the years. And the thing is, it has not been evolving in a way where it's like positive, really more negative, becoming more harsh and harsh. And with them fighting against that creature, it's time for Clark to go ahead and see what is exactly happening in the Phantom Zone. But it's also Clark kind of pointing out the idea that when it came to Jor-El, when Jor-El, his father, had discovered the Phantom Zone, his father and the Kryptonians did not really go in there to see like what the Phantom Zone was truly like. They didn't go in there and try to figure out what's all the different things could happen in that different zone. And so for Clark, he's saying, I need to go in there and investigate to help us learn more about the Phantom Zone, but to also kind of see what exactly is happening when it comes to all those different prisoners who were locked away in the Phantom Zone. Now, for the super family, they're kind of worried for Clark here. Like, are you serious about going in there on your own with no kind of backup? But it's Clark saying he has no choice. Now, for Supergirl, she'll stay behind, and the reason why, because somebody has to lead the super family to protect the Earth, but also Supergirl will be the last full-on Kryptonian to protect the Earth. And so with all that being said, you then have Clark begin to teleport into the Phantom Zone. Except when he does that, well, there are a few people there waiting for him, waiting to get the jump on him. Now, as we get into the second chapter, we kind of pick up with this new character who calls himself the Aether. Now, for the Aether, his main goal is to free all the different prisoners from the Phantom Zone. Now, as we all know, the Phantom Zone was discovered by Jor-El, and over time, you had different people from Jor-El's time, but also Kal-El's time, be put inside the Phantom Zone. And so for the Aether, his main goal is to find a way to free these different people. But getting back over to Superman, we kind of get the idea of what he meant about how the Phantom Zone has truly evolved. And follow me here, because for the Phantom Zone, for many years, it was just this ethereal form where you were technically just a spirit in this other dimension. And that was truly it. But then over time, the Phantom Zone began to change, where it began to take this more physical form. And so for Superman, when he does arrive into the Phantom Zone, we kind of get the idea of the Phantom Zone fully evolved. Not fully, but it has truly evolved, because you now have Superman being confronted by these different prisoners who were locked away by Jor-El many years ago. And so with him confronting them, they want to kill him. Now for Superman, even though he's no longer near the yellow sun, when it came to a good old character known as Bruce Gordon was able to give like Superman these solar batteries on his wrist to keep him supercharged long enough to make sure he'll be able to survive in the Phantom Zone, but to also get back to Earth when he needs to. Now, once you do have Superman kind of go out of his way to take down these different prisoners, you didn't have Clark remind us of some of the bigger threats that came out of the Phantom Zone. Like, for example, the idea of Zod or Ursa or Zadu or Mon-El and Jax-Ur. Like you had all these different powerful characters come out of the Phantom Zone. But with all that being said, while you do have Superman right now with all these different prisoners, they're then confronted by, well, some huge spider-like creatures. So we're kind of getting the idea of like, yes, the Phantom Zone has evolved to the point where we're now beginning to see different creatures pop up in the Phantom Zone. For a brief moment, we have to shift back over to, well, Earth, Metropolis, and we pick up with the Superman of China and Superboy, better known as Connor Kent. And can I just say, it's really great to have Connor Kent back in the picture again when it comes to DC Comics. And I do know, like, he's been around for a good while now, but it's just great to see him again because after reading the New 52 version of Superboy, I was so highly disappointed in that series. But anyways, though, when it comes to Connor Kent and also Superman of China, they're right now just having a good old baseball game in Metropolis in front of a crowd of people. Now, while they were doing that, the alarms go off back at the Fortress of Solitude. And so you do have the two characters disappear to figure out what exactly is going on. The problem is that we don't get the chance to figure out what it was when they do arrive at the Fortress of Solitude. But getting back over to, well, Superman, you have Superman right now still battling against these, well, spiders. But while doing that, he's then confronted by the Phantom King. Now, the Phantom King is a character that we have not really talked a lot about on the channel. It's the idea of the Phantom King being the first prisoner of the Phantom Zone. And really, he is a major threat because even when you have Superman at his best, the Phantom King is still an actual challenge for Superman. But the thing is, once you do have Clark be defeated by the spiders and you then have Superman be confronted by the Phantom King, you have Superman realize that this is not the Phantom King. In reality, it is Mon-El. Now, this is a character that we have not really talked a lot about when it comes to our coverage over Superman, but he is somewhat important when it comes to the actual origin of Clark Kent. Now, when it comes to Mon-El, Mon-El is actually a Daxamite. Now, we have not really talked a lot about Daxamites, but let's go ahead and start now. Daxamites are technically Kryptonians, and let me explain. You see, many years ago, you had some Kryptonians leave Krypton and head over to a different planet. And of course, they were able to then build up their own civilization on that brand new planet. And that is the Daxamites. And so when it came to Mon-El, that's where his people came from. Now, Mon-El, he had crashed on Earth when Kal-El, Clark Kent, was a young boy, like teenager, who was still kind of learning more about his powers and his actual origin. And so once he met Mon-El, who was technically just like him, the two of them had built a tight bond with one another to the point where they kind of felt like they were, well, brothers to one another. The problem was that when it came to Mon-El and his travels across the universe, he was poisoned. And so the only way to save him was to send him into the Phantom Zone. Now, after you have the two characters kind of reunite with one another, for Superman, he does have a lot of questions. And honestly, the dude has the right to ask these type of questions like, what in the world is going on here? Because he now sees Mon-El controlling the ship that used to belong to the Phantom King. Now, it's also Mon-El saying like, hey, listen, I'm sorry for attacking you early with missiles and spiders and my guys and their guns, but like, I had to do that just in case we're being observed. Now, with all that being said, you also didn't have Mon-El show Kal-El where he is keeping the Phantom King. And the Phantom King is currently locked up at the moment as a prisoner. Now, for most of these, prisoners, they really do hate Kal-El a lot because his father Jor-El had locked him away. But either way, you didn't have Mon-El say, let me explain what's truly going on here in the Phantom Zone. The problem is that the story then shifts back over to, we have to shift back over to the other Superman, Superman of China, and also Superboy. Now, for those two characters at the moment, they're still trying to figure out what happened at the Fortress of Solitude. And apparently, everything was taken away or out of the Fortress of Solitude. They have no idea how that's even possible. But you then have both characters get pulled into what seems to be at first a different dimension where someone had taken every single piece of item from the Fortress of Solitude, but kind of reorganize it in a way of like a museum. And so for our heroes, they're kind of wondering like, what in the world is happening here at the moment? Now, when we do switch back over to Mon-El and also Superman, this is where you kind of had the story be explained to us in a tad bit more details. And let me explain. So, we do learn here that what happened in the Phantom Zone, when it came to Aether, when he arrived in the Phantom Zone, his main goal was to begin the process of change, the idea of making this place a better place, because he realized that the Phantom Zone is just complete cruelty to all these different supposed prisoners. The problem was that once you had Aether go out of his way to make the Phantom Zone more physical and start giving the people their tools back to live normally, he realized why these different people were locked away in the Phantom Zone. Because, well, they were violent people. And so then, over time, he began to turn the Phantom Zone into his own special kind of prison. And when it came to the Phantom King, well, the Phantom King was his warden for this prison. And so over time, you had different prisoners be tortured or punished in different types of ways by Aether and also by, well, the Phantom King. Now, we do learn here that over time, you had Mon-El being able to overpower the Phantom King. Here comes the next big problem, though, because while you do have the two characters talk to one another, they both realize that the Phantom King must have gotten out of his prison. And the reason why, because everything has gone well in the forms of phantomness. Not even a word. Anyway, so they realize the Phantom King is no longer in his prison, and they realize where he's going to next. And that would be the idea of him meeting up with, well, Aether. And so once you have these two characters meet up with one another, it's really more of the Phantom King telling Aether how he can bring down Superman. How can he defeat Superman? And he says, listen, go after his adoptive home world, Earth. Once you destroy that, he has no choice but to take a knee and bow to you. The thing is, you have Aether say, I have already begun the process of attacking his adoptive home world. But as we get into the fourth chapter, we're kind of getting into the idea of Superman and Mon-El kind of freaking out because technically you now have the Phantom King out there, and most likely for them, the Phantom King is working with Aether, and we already know he is. But for these two characters, they're kind of having a hard time figuring out what's next for them. For Mon-El, he has other issues as well. His crew, because for him, his crew at the moment right now are beginning to fight against one another, which honestly kind of makes a lot of sense because these are people who've been locked away in the Phantom Zone for many years. And once they had the ability to have a somewhat normal life in the Phantom Zone, they kind of pulled into this all-out battle between Mon-El, the Phantom King, and also Aether, who's also trying to change how the Phantom Zone works, but in a way of still being a prison. And so it's kind of like they never really had a chance to live a normal life ever since they got locked away in the Phantom Zone. But either way, for Superman and also for Mon-El and Mon-El's crew, they do get confronted by, well, the Phantom King and his crew. Now, for Superman, the batteries are getting low. And once those batteries go out, he will no longer really be able to use his powers here in the Phantom Zone. And so right now for Superman, he knows he has to go all out to just be able to defeat the Phantom King, but to also use a way or use his teleporter to get back over to Earth to recharge. Now, getting back over to the plot line for Superboy and Superman, we do learn that yes, you do have somebody going out of their way to take different things out of the Fortress of Solitude and including them to basically put all that stuff and our heroes in a part of a museum, an intergalactic museum, because for them, they believe that with Krypton being blown up many years ago, that there are no survivors. So what do? You go out of your way to collect different artifacts from the dead world to preserve them. The problem is that they don't know that technically there are a few survivors of Krypton, like Superman, Supergirl, Zod. The list goes on and on. But for these people, they truly believe in the idea that Krypton is gone. The problem is that these two heroes can't prove it. One, Superman's from Earth, from China, who was kind of given the powers of Superman. So technically, he's not Kryptonian all the way. And for Superboy, well, he's a clone. He's half human and half Kryptonian. And so for this Intergalactic Museum, they're kind of like, listen, in our books right now, when it comes to Krypton, there are no survivors. But either way, we got to move on. Now, getting back over to the plot line involving, well, our Superman, you have Clark Kent right now just fighting against the Phantom King, but kind of realize that he needs to teleport back to Earth, recharge, come back to the Phantom Zone to take down the Phantom King. The problem is that you have the Phantom King hit, or not really hit, he takes away the teleporter that Clark was going to use. And so once that happens for Clark, he's kind of screwed here at the moment. Now, here's the thing, because you do have Aether arrive. Now, when Aether arrives, we kind of get the idea of how powerful he truly is compared to Superman and also for the Phantom King. Now, for Aether, he kind of feels like the Phantom King had technically failed him. And the reason why, because the Phantom King was supposed to bring Clark to him. But the thing is, Clark arrived technically on his own. And also the fact that Phantom King did not take down Superman yet. And so for Aether, the Phantom King has failed. Now, for me personally, I'm kind of like, you did not give the guy a chance to, wrap everything up to take down Superman, but whatever. And so you have Aether grab the Phantom King and throws him into this pit where the Phantom King will continue to fall. But the thing is, as he's falling, he's kind of going through or seeing different moments of time until he reaches the very point where the Phantom Zone was created. And so for the Phantom King, the dude most likely will see different flashes of his past, but continue to fall down until he hits the very bottom of this, what could be a bottomless pit, but not really, because, it can't be bottomless if it had a bottom. But anyways, you do have the Phantom King just get dropped in there. Now, for Superman, he does try to fight against Aether. But the problem is, Superman is no longer at that level where he could take on a godly being like Aether. And so when you do have Superman try to fight against Aether, it's a pointless battle. But you also have Superman get thrown to that pit as well. Now for Clark, he does remember what Aether said, that this pit is kind of like a time pit, where as you're falling, you're seeing different moments of the past. And so for Clark, his main goal is to use one of those moments to get back to Earth, recharge, and hopefully find a better way to take down Aether. The problem is that for Clark, he does not go through the right portal that leads back to Earth. It leads him back over to Krypton before Krypton was blown up. But now we have to progress into the next chapter, right? And so when we do, it's us seeing, well, Superman, Clark Kent, being on Krypton, but in the past. And let's not forget, when it came to Krypton, they had a red sun. So for Kryptonians, they really had no idea how the suns truly affected them. So for the red sun, they didn't have any powers. But of course, with a yellow sun, they do gain, Superman-like powers. But for Kal-El, he has to fit in, but also hide his crest, because it's the idea of if somebody sees him wearing his family crest, they're going to wonder, what is his connection to the actual family, but also the idea that he's from the future as well. Now, you do have Clark get injured as he goes out of his way to protect somebody's life who's about to get hit by one of the flying drones in this city. Now, of course, with him not having his powers, he does need some kind of medical attention. But I want to transition back over to Aether. And the reason why, because for Aether, it's really him kind of explaining to us why he's upset with the Phantom Zone once again. Because for Mon-El, he got left behind. Phantom King is falling to what could be his death. Clark is now in the past. So for Mon-El, he's stuck in the Phantom Zone with Aether. And for Aether, it's him saying, I came to the Phantom Zone for a reason, like to help turn this place around. And unfortunately, it completely fallen apart. And so here you guys are taking my gifts and just spitting it back at me. And so no, for me, it's time for the Phantom Zone to go. And for Mon-El, he can't do anything at all to stop Aether, especially when it comes to his crew, who's now on the side of, well, Aether. I kind of want to go ahead and shift over to, well, good old Superman and Superboy, the plot line B here. Now, when it comes to those two characters, they're still at the museum, right? But you didn't have the museum be attacked by another race of people. Now, this race is known as the Khans. And for the Khans, they're kind of like somewhat like Mongol, but not as smart as Mongol. But either way, for the Khans, they're upset with the fact the museum has also taken items and people that have belonged to their culture, to their people. And so you do have them right now trying to attack this museum. The problem for our heroes at the moment is that they just can't leave. And the reason why, because there are a lot of powerful alien weapons there as well. So those weapons could possibly fall into the wrong hands, like the Khans. And so right now you have her to say, let's go ahead and take them on. The problem is that they don't realize the Khans had came with an army. So of course for our two heroes, they kind of have a challenge right now in front of them. Now, when we do switch over to Kal-El, we kind of learn like what point in time Kal-El is at when it comes to being on Krypton, but in the past. It's the idea that it's only probably a couple of days to the point where Krypton is going to be blown up. And the reason why, because when he goes over to his parents' home, he runs into his mother, he runs into his father. And the thing is, those two characters right there, well, his mom, she's holding his younger self, who's a baby. So as we all know, it has to be only a couple of days before Krypton was blown up. But he does run into Jor-El. Now, the reason why he came to Jor-El is because he was kind of hoping that Jor-El would go out of his way to fix the solar battery so that when Kal-El goes back into the Phantom Zone, he'll then be able to use solar batteries as a way to fight against Aether. Now, with all that being said, while you do have the two guys talking in the lab with Jor-El, we kind of get the idea that Jor-El tried to talk to the council, but they were not listening to him about the idea of Krypton being blown up. But it's also Kal-El seeing the Phantom Zone teleporter being in the actual room as well with the two of them. Now, with all that being said, you didn't have this character from the Science Council arrive in the room, and his name is Rozon. Now, for Rozon, he's part of the Science Council, but it's also him saying, like, I'm the overseer of any kind of technology being built when it comes to the name of science, and which means that anytime Jor-El goes out of his way to create something, it's Rozon's job to observe it, to make sure it's actually helpful for Krypton. And so for Rozon, what he's saying right now is that in this lab, there are devices that Jor-El had created, but has not shared with the council yet, and that is not a good thing to do at all. And so you do have Rozon go out of his way to tell the soldiers or the guards to go ahead and claim any kind of device that Jor-El had in his lab, the Phantom Zone teleporter, and also Kal-El's solar batteries. Now, for Kal-El, he does try to fight back against Rozon, but you have the guards knock out Kal-El. And the batteries and also, well, the Phantom Zone teleporter now belong to Rozon.